So, as most of y'all should know by now, unless you've been living under a rock, Walking with Dinosaurs has returned and it looks glorious. And yes, I am back temporarily to review it since this channel is now just basically an outlet for me to talk about stuff when I'm bored. Also, spoilers obviously. I know not every country has seen this release yet, so spoilers. And also if my voice sounds a bit raspy, I have a sore throat, so you gotta deal with it. Anyways, let's see if this show can live up to the hype. In a similar fashion to the original show, Walking with Dinosaurs 2025 features 6 episodes with each episode following a cast of dinosaurs from a certain point in prehistoric time. Although the episodes in this one don't follow a chronological order and most of them seem to take place in the Cretaceous, except for the last one. Also, instead of Kenneth Branagh's narration, the series is instead narrated by Bertie Carvel. Is that how you pronounce his name? Ah, no. After a brief homage to the original Walking with Dinosaurs intro, we jump into the Late Cretaceous and follow the adventures of a baby Triceratops named Clover. It starts off with an encounter with an Inferno Dracon. I do like how the pterosaur literally doesn't care about Clover and only wants her egg back that was displaced out of the nest when Clover played with it. However, after this, the pterosaur is eaten by a T-Rex. Then, a brief encounter with an old bull Triceratops who will play a part later in the episode. As night falls, there's an intense chase with an adult T-Rex that Clover barely escapes, to then finding companionship with a herd of Edmontosaurus, which is pretty cool to see some non-violent interspecies interactions. It doesn't last long though, as another T-Rex ambushes the herd and eats a youngling. The final part of this episode sees Clover running from yet another T-Rex, or maybe it's the same one this whole time? I can't really tell. Anyway, she runs into the old bull that then fights the T-Rex and ends up goring and killing it with its horns. I do like how realistic the fight is. It's a lot of roaring and intimidation with a few brief physical confrontations, which makes sense as both parties want to avoid grievous injuries. Though that didn't really end up mattering for the T-Rex now, did it? Now is the point where I mentioned that in between these scenes, there are a lot of scenes of paleontologists out in the field who serve to explain their findings and how the prehistoric scenes pertain to them. I do feel like the paleontology segments do interrupt the story a lot, as some of the jump cuts are poorly placed in the middle of a scene, and thus it kinda gives a bit of whiplash. And some of them just drag on too long to the point where you're just waiting to get back to the dinosaur segments. Also, some of these scenes you can really tell they are very obviously scripted, and it just took me out of the scene because the dialogue just doesn't feel like an actual conversation. Otherwise, though, I thought the episode was alright, and it does give a good introduction to the series. Episode 2, The River Dragon, sees a male Spinosaurus named Sobek with his babies as they leave their safe nursery pool to more plentiful lands. On this journey, they have a brief encounter with Carcharodontosaurus hunting a hadrosaur, then with another Carcharodontosaurus guarding a dead sauropod carcass. Once again, I like how realistic the encounter is, with both predators trying to intimidate each other off the carcass, and Sobek eventually backing off due to not wanting to risk injuries as he has babies to look after. Then, as they enter a thick forest, they are stalked by an Elanqua, and the sequence was so brilliantly done with the Elanqua blending into the backdrop of the trees and just slowly getting closer to one of the babies before striking. Excellently done sequence. Then they reach the Onchopristi's breeding grounds, where Sobek tries to gain a primary fishing spot from an older male that doesn't succeed, so he instead goes into the water to catch the fish by ambush. I feel like this is a good compromise to the two opposing theories of how Spinosaurus hunted, which, if you don't know, are either that it waded like some modern birds or that it swam like a crocodile. This episode basically just says it's possible that it could have done both given the circumstances. After successfully catching one, Sobek returns to feed his babies, though this comes at the cost of his life, as another Spinosaurus inflicted a fatal injury, which I think is a good demonstration of how deadly injuries can be in the wild, and thus explains why animals try to avoid physical altercations. The paleontology scenes in this one, I feel like, are a lot more well done than the previous episodes. They are placed in spots that feel like good cutaway points for the story, and they're brief enough to where they don't overstay their welcome, while still being very informative. I think it does help that the story itself is a lot more calm, and therefore the cutaways don't feel nearly as jarring as they did in the first episode. Overall, I like this episode quite a bit. Simple story, great directing, which I'll talk about more in the end of the video, and improves on aspects which I thought were lacking in the previous episode. The next episode focuses on a Gastonian named George as he navigates the prehistoric forests of Utah and dictates his encounters with dangers in the form of a pack of Utah Raptor. The episode starts off with a young George as his family is ambushed by the Utah Raptors that ends with one of the Raptors getting slapped in the face and causing a retreat. We then see George get kicked out of the family group chat and, like your average teenager, stumbles into a life of ganghood by butting heads with another Gastonia and becoming friends afterwards. Then we see the Utah Raptors on the hunt for the gang in the forest, and the Gastonia manage to remain undetected. This part does a really good job at building tension and making you think the Raptors might get them before giving a sign of relief at the last minute. The next encounter takes place on a riverbank where the Raptors ambush the Gastonia gang and flips one of them over in Dominus Rex style before killing it. Honestly, with how heavily built and robust Utah Raptor is, I can see this being very plausible. What I do take issue with is the fact that the pack leader suddenly starts stalking George even though there's literally a fresh kill right next to him. I thought we were past the days where dinosaurs just kill each other for the heck of it. Although it's not as bad as the pack chases a herd of Planicoxa. Planicoxa? I think that's how you pronounce it. Instead. But it's probably still the biggest glaring issue with the series so far. The last encounter with the Utah Raptors sees the gang form a circular defense position much like the adults in the beginning, and it ends with the pack leader getting gored in the face and dying as a result. Again, I do like how the fight is not straight up a death match like it was in Jurassic Fight Club. We don't ever talk about that. The final sequence of the episode shows a forest fire engulfing both dinosaurs, and while the Utah Raptors manage to outrun the fire, they end up running straight towards quicksand that kills them anyway. Which, by the way, is representing the pretty famous Utah Raptor bone bed that made pretty big headlines a few years back. The Gastonia, on the other hand, weren't any luckier, and they couldn't escape the forest fire and suffocated from the smoke. A pretty grim way to end the episode, but it doesn't hold its punches in killing any of its named dinosaurs, and I respect that. Overall, this episode was alright. I don't think it's as good as River Dragon, because it is in this episode that the cracks really start to show for the series, but I'll touch on that more at the end. Episode 4 starts off with a brief confrontation between a young female Albertosaurus named Rose and a large Rhinoceratops that predictably ends with Rose backing off. We then enter a cave where we are introduced to the rest of the pack, including Rose's mate and the matriarch. Honestly, I won't be surprised if this was a nod to the Gorgosaurus from March of the Dinosaurs since it's very specific, but even if it's not, it's cool to see this very unique environment on display. The pack then ventures out to hunt a herd of migrating Edmontosaurus, and I do appreciate how they didn't just reuse the model from the first episode because there are noticeable differences with this one, which would make sense since I'm pretty sure this represents an older species. The herd, however, is delayed, so instead Rose and her mate hunts down a Cryodracon. The matriarch, however, finds them and steals their kill while giving Rose a painful face bite. We then get what I can only describe as the equivalent to the Carnotaurus dance scene from Prehistoric Planet, this time in the form of Rose and her mate rubbing their tiny arms against each other. Honestly, this might be one of the most adorable scenes I've ever seen in a documentary. Then, as the Amatosaurus herd finally arrives, the hunt commences. The first attempt ends up with Rose's mate being trampled in the stampede Mufasa style. Okay, that was just wrong. Anyway, the second attempt is successful as Rose manages to isolate an older individual to the powerful jaws of the matriarch, and the pack can finally feed. Having proven her worth in the hunt, Rose earns her place in the pecking order. Whether it's intentional or not, there are some pretty cool references to other dino dogs, not only with the March of the Dinosaurs part earlier, but the hunt at the end was definitely inspired by the Daspletosaurus hunt in Dinosaur Planet. Overall, I enjoyed this episode. It had its fair share of action, that you would expect from a predator-focused episode, while having enough calm and even cute scenes to break up the tension. So if the previous episode had nods to March of the Dinosaurs, this one is the March of the Dinosaurs episode, only this time the central focus is on a baby Pachyrhinosaurus named Albie and the perils of his migration. The first danger comes in the form of a near encounter with an Asdark pterosaur that sees Albie being saved by his mother. Then, a pit stop with two males fighting over dominance results in Albie being separated from his mother in the aftermath. Once they are reunited, they enter a forest where a pack of Gorgosaurus stalks them. Albie gets another lucky escape as the Gorgosaurus targeted a Montosaurus instead. Then, as the herd reaches a destination, Albie and his mother have a final confrontation with the Gorgosaurus. However, before either side could kill each other, a flash flood caused by storms drowns both parties. The final shot shows that despite the mass loss of life, some of the herd lives on as a new generation of dinosaurs are born. Unfortunately, I think this is the weakest episode so far because a lot of the ideas explored in this episode are stuff that we've already seen previously. Just to name a few, we've seen journey type episodes to fertile lands, we've seen clashes between the same species and group dynamics. We've even seen a much more dramatic natural disaster sequence. Hell, if you want to get really specific, we've seen a baby ceratopsian trying to survive in a dangerous world which includes an encounter with pterosaurs and tyrannosaurs. Not to mention this is the third time we've seen Edmontosaurus, and frankly, the Gorgosaurus model is pretty much indistinguishable from the Albertosaurus in the previous episode. All this leads to the episode feeling kind of redundant, as there are really no new ideas being presented. It just seems that way because there are different dinosaurs and it is in a different setting. I honestly think it's a huge missed opportunity because the Mesozoic is so vast in scope that we could have gone perhaps an episode focusing on mammals or even marine reptiles or stuff like that than just rehashing the same ideas using a different font. So yeah, safe to say, I am a bit disappointed with this episode, but let's hope the finale can end on a high note. The final episode is the only one to take place outside of the Cretaceous, being set in the Jurassic, and it starts with an introduction to an old bull lucid titan named Old Grande as he scares off a pair of Torvosaurus. The episode tells the tale of his quest to what is said to be his last chance to mate. He finds a female on the beach and walks as her companion until he encounters a rival male that seriously injures his leg in a surprise attack, and the rival walks off with the female. Old Grande survives this injury and consumes bone for the rich nutrients in order to heal. And I'm only mentioning specifically this part because it does show unique behavior which is not often shown, especially in herbivores. Still though, he has a long way to recover, and during this period, a Torvosaurus tries to attack him but fails. The night passes and he gets back on his feet and is off to find the female again. Once he does, he has a final tussle with his rival, defeating him, and after a courtship ritual, secures the female and his bloodline. The series ends with a final shot of lucid titan eggs as the narration states that the hatchlings would begin their own story. Overall, I'd say it's an alright finale. Not the most spectacular, but not horrible either. It does its job well, and it does end on an uplifting note suiting for a finale. As for the rest of the episode, I think it's alright. I do like how it does focus on a single dinosaur and the story is pretty simple while still being interesting to watch unfold. Other than that though, I really don't have much else to say. Like I said, it wasn't anything spectacular, but it is a solid episode overall, just perhaps not what I would put as a finale. So, Walking with Dinosaurs 2025. Does it live up to its namesake? Well, starting with what I think is one of the most outstanding parts of the series, it's the cinematography. I think this might actually be the most well shot dinosaur documentary I've ever seen. Like, on par or even above Prehistoric Planet. Some of the shots are just spectacular. Everything from the framing, composition, lighting, it all makes for such gorgeous shots of not only the landscapes, but the dinosaurs and even the paleontologists. Now obviously the dinosaurs and even the environments are not as photoreal as Prehistoric Planet, but I won't hold that against it since I'm pretty sure it has a lower budget than Prehistoric Planet. Don't quote me on that, I might be incorrect. But, Prehistoric Planet is just in a league of its own in that department anyway, so it's a pretty high bar. But what we do get is still pretty dang good. I like the dinosaur designs overall, and I'm pretty sure they are fairly accurate. They blend in with the environments well enough, and it's still pretty high quality production. And again, the cinematography definitely carries the series a lot. There are a few nitpicks I do have. First off, it does still follow a few bad tropes from older documentaries, like what I mentioned during the Gastonia episodes, and there are a few other examples, but overall, it's not something you really notice unless you are well versed in dinosaur documentaries. Basically, if you're not a super nerd like I am, you wouldn't have noticed. Now, the other nitpick has to do with the paleontology segments. Look, obviously, from a scientific perspective, these segments provide a wealth of knowledge and scientific information that a documentary should have, and I think that's a good thing. My issue with it is the way they are integrated into the episodes. This is especially the case in episode 1, but sometimes a scene will just abruptly cut and it just takes you out of the scene and any tension that was built up during it. The later episodes do a better job at integrating these scenes, but sometimes the cuts are still just a bit jarring. I know this might just be a me issue, but that was something that bothered me. Though I do admit I did get used to it eventually, but I don't know, maybe it could have been edited differently to make these cuts not as abrupt and jarring. Also, another nitpick, in some of the paleontological scenes, you can very obviously tell the people are talking to the audience, but it's in a way where it's trying to make it sound like a conversation with another paleontologist, and again, it just took me out of it. Yes, I know this is 100% coming from the film reviewer within me, but I just can't unsee it, you know? Like, I think I would have liked it more if the paleontologists were just straight up talking directly at the camera, like the talking head segments in older dinosaur documentaries. Like, those segments had a certain charm to them because you could really feel the excitement and the enthusiasm of the paleontologists talking that is just missing from these scenes in this documentary. But aside from that, let's answer the big question, shall we? Does this documentary live up to its namesake? Look, from a technical and scientific point of view, this documentary reaches peaks far above the original series. The latest paleontological knowledge is presented with some of the best visuals you can ask for in a dinosaur documentary. The dinosaurs are among the best they've ever been, but the original Walking with Dinosaurs had what I can only describe as a soul to it that is just missing from this one. I don't know if it's because the stories were more engaging to follow, because they weren't cut up by paleontological bits, or that the old visuals and practical effects had a certain charm to them. It just feels like something is missing from the 2025 version that makes it not feel like Walking with Dinosaurs. And I know as far as I can tell, the series isn't trying to outright copy the original, and I can understand and even respect that. But when you use the name of a well-known and well-loved IP, there comes a certain expectation that the product will have the essence of what made the original IP so well loved. And I feel like Walking with Dinosaurs 2025 just doesn't capture that. I still think it's a very good documentary. On its own, it is no doubt in the upper echelon of dinosaur documentaries, and I don't think anyone would argue that. But as a successor to the Walking with Dinosaurs brand, it doesn't quite live up to the expectation, and maybe that's okay. Perhaps this documentary just wasn't what I expected when I saw Walking with Dinosaurs was returning. Maybe my own expectations were too high. I'm sure a ton of people, and especially kids, will love this documentary, but as someone who grew up with the original series, it just didn't hit the same spot in my heart, and the whole time I just wanted more. Maybe I'll get that, maybe I won't, but as it stands right now, Walking with Dinosaurs 2025 is a great documentary that, unfortunately, at least to me, had to live up to a legacy that I don't think it was equipped to do. So, that was my review of Walking with Dinosaurs 2025, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, I am feeling a bit under the weather, so if I sounded off during the video, that's because why. But if I wanted to have this released by the time I wanted to have it released, which is as soon as possible, these are the circumstances we're dealing with. Anyways, yeah, I mean, I guess let me know what you guys think of Walk with Dinosaurs 2025. If you've seen it, if not, obviously watch the show first, then give your opinion. Yeah, and I don't know if I'll be making another video anytime soon, but we'll see if I get bored. But anyways, yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. I don't know when that be. Bye.